Combat is one of the biggest parts of Dungeons and Dragons, and unfortunately, it can be a little confusing sometimes. Now, we're going to go ahead and break down just the basics of combat. There's going to be a couple things that I'm going to leave out here just because it's rare that they even see action in the game, but we'll cover the more advanced stuff in a later video. For now, let's start off with just the general order of things, right? The first thing you want to do with combat, and this is for dungeon masters as well as players, is establish positions. And by that I mean establish where each individual player is, as well as each individual enemy, whether it be monster, person, we'll say creature just for context. There's a couple ways you can do this. Personally, I prefer this nice little graph poster thing. This is from chessx.com. It's really cool because it's reversible. It's got some hexes for other TTRPGs that I'm not going to mention here. But each individual square on this is a 5 foot by 5 foot area, which is the standard size. Your character is going to fit in a 5 foot by 5 foot square. Most creatures will. Most, not all. You use that to determine where each individual creature is, including the player characters, and you can also use it to determine whether or not something is in range of an attack. But we'll cover attacks and ranges a little bit later in the video. Next thing you want to do is roll for initiative. Rolling for initiative it's simple, it's straightforward. You roll a d20 and you add your dexterity modifier or subtract your dexterity modifier depending on what it is. It's one of the simplest things, and I still see people get it wrong all the time. All the time I have players sit there and they roll and they just tell me what their roll is. I don't memorize what each individual player's stat modifiers are. I've got a lot going on just by being the DM. I'm not going to remember your stat modifiers. That's your responsibility. Now, I'm kind of a forgiving DM. If you roll and you give me your base roll, I can see your die. I can clearly see what you rolled. If you roll a 16 and tell me, 16, I'm not just going to say, okay, 16, you're going fourth. No, I'm going to ask what your dexterity modifier is. I'm going to ask you to do the math because I'm not doing it for you. Chances are I've got 8 other creatures on this board that I've got to do math for. I'm not doing it for you. So that's really, really simple. But like I said, I do see people mess it up all the time, and that's okay. We learn by messing up. It's just the way people are. So, and then you're going to go ahead and actually take your turn. Now, the turn in and of itself has a couple of components. First one's going to be movement. Now, each individual race has its own set movement speed, and this was a little bit different in 5e, where the dwarves and the gnomes, and I want to say the halflings, if I remember correctly, had a movement of 25, and then everything else had a movement of 30. Now, everything has a movement of 30 except for Goliaths, which have a movement of 35. So movement's a lot easier as a base. There's different ways to change your overall movement speed. But for a base, unless you're running a Goliath, your movement's 30. Cool, whatever. It's simple, it's straightforward, great. Basically, you can kind of only move in 5 foot increments because each individual square is a 5 foot by 5 foot square. But that also kind of keeps it simple as well, because now you don't have to do what you would if you were playing, I don't know, Warhammer 40K, where you have to have a measuring tape to see how far you can go. The game's fun, but it gets ridiculous fast. No, you have to move in a 5 foot by 5 foot square. Increments of 5 makes it easy. It's cool. It's whatever. Next is communicating. Now, communicating is where your turn is going to get complicated, kind of. You can say anything short, whatever you want, motion, some kind of gesture, a quick sentence. You can do that fine, no problem. But if you want to do anything a little bit more elaborate, like try and say a plan or, do some kind of complicated hand sign string to your teammates, your allies, try and let them know what's going on, that's going to take an action according to rules as written. That's going to be up to your dungeon master. I personally don't care unless you're trying to talk the enemy down from fighting or something. That will take your action because you're trying to convince them of something. But if you're just trying to tell your plan to your ally that's standing right next to you, I might make it take your bonus action. but a full action seems a little ridiculous to me personally. However, rules as written does say it takes an entire action to communicate anything elaborate. Next is interacting with things, interacting with objects in general. You can interact with one object for free during your movement, which means like if you're storming through a door, you can interact with that door by opening it without taking an action. However, if you want to interact with a second object, that takes an action. Some things that make sense for, some things it doesn't. So that's also really going to kind of be at the discretion of your dungeon master. Me personally, if you have to walk through 2 doors and it's within your movement speed, that second door is not going to take your action for me. I don't care. It's a door. If it's going to take your action, you might as well just break the damn thing down so nobody else has to deal with it behind you. I don't care. Fine, whatever. Rules as written say that second door is going to take your action. Who cares? Most dungeon masters are probably going to side with me on little things like that, not taking an action, sometimes maybe taking a bonus action. However, some magic items will require you to use your interaction as an action in order to use said magic item. So make sure you read the fine print on your magic items. Finally, the attack. Attacking is where a lot of people get confused. For the beginning of any campaign, if you start at level 1, which is fun in my opinion, you're only going to be able to attack once, right? Certain things will let you do a secondary attack as a bonus action. I say attack with air quotes because you don't get to add any modifiers to it no matter what. It's just, a second swing. If you hit, it's base rolls across the board. It's fine, it's whatever. There's a lot of things that go into attacking that make it complicated, but we're going to touch on that a little bit later. It's a little bit further down on the board, but it's part of the turn, so there it is. Now, movement and positioning is tricky, especially if you don't have the grid board, the grid sheet, whatever you want to call it, whatever you have. If you don't have it, it's going to get tricky. Everyone calls it a little bit different when you don't play with it. I like what Brennan Lee Mulligan calls it, the theater of the mind, right? It gets difficult. I've played like that. Hell, I've played with text-based Discord private chats. It's rough. It's still fun, but it's rough. But that's where it gets really tricky on remembering where everyone and everything is. So I still recommend using a die for everyone. D4 is this person. The D4 is this main goblin. This D6 or this D4 that's says 2 is this other goblin. So on and so forth. And position them on like a blank surface, so you still have a rough estimation on where everyone's positioned, just to make it a little bit easier on knowing who's still up, knowing who's getting attacked and who's not, especially when you have multiples of the same type of monster. It gets a little confusing without some form of representation. Not saying you can't do it, it just gets a little rough, right? So when moving, you have to keep in mind the terrain. Difficult terrain is going to essentially cut your speed in half, rounded down. Because you can't walk through a giant lake of mud as easily as you could, the forest, or just the grassy plains. It's just not going to happen. It's difficult. It's going to take longer, and therefore you can't move as far. Or if you're running across a ice lake, your speed is cut in half because you have to move slower or risk falling. And even then, you still kind of risk falling because, hey, spoiler alert, you're walking on ice. Some dungeon masters I've seen will allow you to keep your full movement speed, but you're going to have to make a dexterity check every 10 feet you go, and you're rolling at disadvantage because you're running on the ice instead of just walking on ice. I don't do that personally, but I don't have a problem with it. I see a lot of other DMs do it, and it does kind of make sense, especially if you're running away from something that you can't beat, whatever. Breaking up the movement. You don't have to take all of your movement in one go. You don't. A lot of people think you do. In fact, you don't even have to take your movement at all if you don't want to. In fact, there are some classes like the Rogue that that have a class feature that lets you completely get rid of your movement without actually moving in order to attack with advantage, or some other kind of perk. So you don't have to move every turn. If you're a melee fighter, I recommend moving every turn. If you're a ranged fighter that doesn't have the steady aim class feature, I would still recommend moving, just because enemies are going to be moving. Sometimes I am closer to you, and if you're a squishy wizard, yeah, you do a lot of damage, but you have no health. You want to back up so the melee enemies can't get to you. But to each their own. You can move, say, 10 feet, attack, then move your other 20 feet, move 10 feet, attack, move 10 feet, use your bonus action for something else, then move your other 10 feet for your full 30 feet. You can break up your movement however you want, within reason. You can't, if you have to walk 10 feet to a wall, then walk 10 feet to go around a wall, you can't then go 30 feet straight ahead from where you're standing. That's not how that breakdown works, because you got to go 10 feet forward, 10 feet right, and then 10 feet forward. It's just the way it works. Objects still get in your way, but aside from that, you can break it up however you want. Creature size and moving around creatures are things that are important when it comes to movement and positioning, because if you've got a tiny creature, then most of the time you can step right over it. You can go through it. Some DMs still won't let you. I will. I don't care. It takes up less than 5 feet. Move through it. But if you got like a large one, you got to go around it. Something your size, you got to go around it. The creature size is important solely because you need to know whether or not you have to go around this creature to get past it. And going around a creature will open you up to something called an attack of opportunity, which we will discuss later, but it's important, so keep it at the forefront of your mind. Then there's this thing called going prone. Now, a lot of people don't want to go prone, and that's fair. Going prone isn't great. You have to get rid of all of your speed in order to stand back up. Movement while prone is kind of up to the discretion of the dungeon master. I allow it at half speed because you're crawling. Going prone is laying down. You could get knocked prone. If you're knocked prone, I'm not going to let you move the first turn because you got knocked down. The wind's been knocked out of you. You're still catching your breath because combat is quick. However, if you choose to go prone, I will allow you to move at half speed. I've seen other DMs do this as well. Most don't. Most say, oh, you're prone, you can't move until you get back up. Sure, that makes sense, I suppose, but we've all had to crawl before. We've all been laying down and had to crawl, whether we're trying to sneak out because, there's this huge party that we want to go to, or, we joined the military and they made us do the crawl through the obstacle course. We've all had to crawl at some point in our life for one reason or another. You can move while prone. That's how I interpret it. Your dungeon master might be different, but if you want to move while prone, show them that you can move while laying down. Most of the time, they'll allow it if you can do it. Now we're going to move on to making an attack. So, making an attack is the fastest way to end any combat, because you're going to defeat the creatures that are attacking you. Yeah, if you've got a bard or even a sorcerer, a character with high charisma, and you're facing a creature with high intelligence or even like a modicum of intelligence, you might be able to talk them down from the fight. Might. But the fastest way is going to be to just kill them. Murder hobo it up. It is what it is. That's the name of the game lately. However, there are a couple things to keep in mind. First thing you need to do is, pick your target. Now, before you pick your target, you have to remember whether you are a melee attacker or a ranged attacker. Because if you're a melee attacker and you don't have a weapon that has reach, you can only hit something that is, if you've got one of these, on an adjacent square. Meaning it's got to be within 5 feet of you. If you have a weapon with reach, like I think a glaive, then you have an additional 5 feet. So you need to keep that in mind. And if you're making a ranged attack, all ranged weapons have in the parentheses somewhere on their block the shortest amount of range and the longest amount of range. If you make any attack outside of that range, outside of those numbers, whether the creature's too close or the creature's too far, you're rolling at disadvantage. Don't do that. Don't do that. If a creature is prone, which we just talked about, as a melee attacker, you have advantage on that prone target because they're laying on the ground. It's really easy for you to hit them. They're not going anywhere. They're laying down, right? However, a ranged attack gets disadvantage on prone because they're laying down. It's a smaller target and they're far away. So you have to keep that condition, at the forefront of your mind as well when you're picking your targets. So melee or ranged attack, pick your target accordingly. It matters. Then you had to determine your modifier. And by that, I mean, are you proficient in this weapon? Because if so, you add your proficiency mod into the attack. Are you attacking with a ranged weapon? Because if so, you're adding your dexterity modifier. Are you attacking with a melee weapon that doesn't have finesse or variable? I'm certain that's not the word I'm looking for. But if so, you're using strength. Are you attacking with a spell that tells you exactly which modifier you're using? Are you attacking with a spell that uses your spell modifier? Because that's going to depend on your class. You need to decide how you're attacking so that you can figure out exactly how much you're adding to not only the attack roll, but the damage roll. Should you attack with a longbow and you manage to hit your target, you're going to roll your d6, d8, and you're going to add your dexterity modifier. If your dexterity modifier is 2, then cool, you get to add 2 to whatever you rolled on that d8. Fantastic. If your dexterity is +0, then why are you attacking with a ranged weapon? I don't understand. But next we're going to talk about attack of opportunity. Now, there's always been a little bit of like a gray area with attack of opportunity. I've scoured the 5th edition Player's Handbook again, but right before this video, going over the entire combat section several times. And nowhere in it does it really say anything specific about attack of opportunity. Maybe I was looking in the wrong section. That's very possible. I was only going under the combat because that's where it is in the new Player's Handbook. But in 5e, everyone accepted that an attack of opportunity could be made whenever a creature entered or exited your range. If they're entering your range, you shouldn't really get an attack of opportunity because chances are they're entering your range, your 5 foot by 5 foot area, to attack you. If they're entering to attack you, then you don't get an attack of opportunity because they're attacking you. You don't have an opportunity to attack. The rules as written now, it's very perfectly clear. You only get an attack of opportunity when a target, a creature that you can see, leaves your range. Now, I would argue that if it's walking by you, it's not leaving your range until it's behind you. So technically, you can't see it leave your range, and therefore you don't get an attack of opportunity. However, before you try and crucify me on this, I believe you still deserve that attack of opportunity because you watched them go by you. I would argue that you can easily turn and watch them leave. Makes sense to me. You get that attack of opportunity. There are some stickler GMs out there that would say, no, you don't see it. You're facing forward. He left behind you. You don't get it. I think they're wrong, but it's their table. They get to make that decision. You don't have to like it. You just have to accept it. Now, if somebody comes up behind you, hits you from behind, and then gets the hell out of dodge, you don't get that attack of opportunity. You didn't see them at any point in time. You're going to have to live with that as well. It is what it is. But an attack of opportunity lets you, whenever a target leaves your 5 foot area that you can see, you get to make an attack with either the weapon in your hand or an unarmed strike, depending on what's best for you personally. And that, I've seen an attack of opportunity finish a combat before. It's very rare, but I've seen it happen. Chances are you're probably not going to hit them, but I mean, you don't get to add anything to it. You used to be able to, and I disagreed with this heavily, but you used to be able to add, like, if you're a paladin, Divine Smite to your attack of opportunity. I thought that was dumb. I didn't really let people do it, but I understood where they were coming from. It was already a broken skill. Divine Smite was super broken. I don't really like all of the changes they made to it, but they made it a little bit more balanced, but that's not what this video is about. So next we're going to talk about damage. Damage is as a whole complex, but we're only going to talk about the basics. So we're not going to talk about damage types. We're not going to talk about any kind of condition that can come from any of the damages. We're going to talk about damage rolls and critical hits, rules as written. I know every Dungeon Master out there has their own little specific tidbit on critical hits. I don't personally have a problem with the way it is, rules as written, but some people do. And that's okay. That's okay. So damage rolls is going to be just rolling whatever damage die comes with the weapon that you're using. So a short bow is going to be a D6. You're going to roll a D6. Longsword, I want to say is a D10. Don't quote me on that. And then you add your modifier to whatever you roll to decide the damage. It's pretty straightforward as long as you know which modifier you're supposed to use, whether it be strength or dexterity. For most weapons are going to be either strength or dexterity. In fact, aside from magical items, I can't think of any weapon that's going to use anything other than strength or dexterity for the damage die modifier. But I don't have everything in the game memorized. That would be completely ludicrous. Now, a critical hit, however, is going to do a lot of damage. Well, a lot of damage. It could do a lot of damage. A lot of DMs I've seen will let you roll your attack die or roll your damage die, take that damage number. So say you roll a D8 and you roll a 7 and your modifier is 4. You add 4, that's 11 points of damage, and then you just double that. That's the simplest way of doing critical hits, but that's not how the rules as written are. The rules as written are you take your damage die, you roll it twice, add both rolls together, and then add your modifier. It gives you a chance to do more damage sometimes, but it also gives you a bigger chance to do less damage. So if you roll a 7 and then you roll a 1, that's 8 plus 4 is 12. That's significantly less than the 22 you would have had if I had just let you double the 7 plus 4, right? And then I've seen some Dungeon Masters, they'll take your damage roll, so that's 7, double just the damage roll, so it's now 14, and then add your modifier. That, 18 is still significantly higher than that 12, right? So every Dungeon Master is going to do it a little bit differently. I can guarantee you on that. You will occasionally have a Dungeon Master that does it like one of the ones you've played with in the past, but they're going to call it something different, like crunchy crit, bloodied crit, whatever. What they call it is irrelevant. It's how they run it. So be sure to ask at the beginning of any campaign, in any session 0, ask how they do their critical hits. Because that's a really important thing, because, yeah, getting critical hits kind of rare most times. You want to know how to do it before you roll that nat 20 on that attack. That way they don't have to try and explain everything mid-combat. Nothing derails combat faster than having to stop everything and explain this one thing that should have been explained at session 0 that they always forget to explain. If you have any questions about any combat things that you think they might do differently, ask during session 0. If they don't have a session 0, well, I'm not going to say that they might not be the DM for you, but I mean, session 0s are crucial. It lets everyone know the Dungeon Master's little nuances to the game. It also lets everyone at the table know what everyone's comfortable with. But, that's a topic for another day. Always ask your DM for their nuances on combat, because asking in the middle of combat derails the entire session. It's really hard, really, really hard to jump right back into combat when you have to stop in the middle of it to explain something, sometimes twice. If you ask at session 0 and somebody doesn't understand, now they can ask for more explanation, and you're not interrupting anything except for people making their characters, which is okay to interrupt if it means learning the rules a little bit better. So don't ever be afraid to ask questions about combat. It's complex enough. This was just the basics. We didn't even get into mounted combat, flying combat, underwater combat. We didn't get into any of that. Damage types, that'll all be my next combat video, which I'm working on already, to be honest with you. So it will be out soon, but this is the basics of combat. If you have any questions at all, feel free to ask in the comments below. I love having conversations with you guys. If you learned something, make sure you subscribe because I got more information coming for you. If you think I'm wrong, let me know. I love being told when I'm wrong. I really do. So, as always, thanks for watching.